So, the NBA, All-Star Weekend, getting close to the end of the season. They tell me there are several highly desirable incoming players for the draft, which has enhanced the propensity to tank. And I have seen different things this week about the tanking problem in the NBA. And last night, the NBA fined two teams, significant amounts. Utah Jazz, $500,000. Indiana Pacers, $100,000 for violating the league's participation policy by sitting healthy players and undermining the integrity of the games, and more importantly, undermining the integrity of the wagers on the games and creating a new vein of inside information that would be available to those who knew that healthy players were not going to play. And I'm not surprised by any of this. I'm encouraged by the fact that the NBA is doing something about it, Michael, but it's really not that much money in the grand scheme of things if the goal is to try to get a player that's going to transform your franchise.
Yeah, I agree. It's not that much money, and I'm wondering how much the NBA is doing about it because, Mike, this has been going on for decades in the NBA, and there have been certain changes, and ultimately they've been cosmetic changes to the draft lottery system to discourage tanking, but tanking has never been discouraged. We got the lottery in the first place because way back in the day, the Houston Rockets got the first pick in the draft in 1 year. They got Ralph Sampson. And then the next year, they got the first pick in the draft again. They got the second best player in the draft. In retrospect, they got Hakeem Olajuwon. The best player in that draft, obviously, was Michael Jordan. And so back-to-back years, they kind of engineered it to get the first pick. And so then they bring in the lottery system, and that still has led to some teams saying, well, I got to get into the lottery. As recently as a couple of years ago, a team that was not competing for the first overall pick, the Dallas Mavericks at the time, which they did get last year, but at the time the Mavericks weren't competing for the first pick, but they didn't want to make the playoffs. So they took their best players out down the stretch with like 4 or 5 games to play so they could have a lottery pick that wasn't going to be in the top 5, but was going to allow them to keep a pick. So the NBA has a lot of work to do, and I don't think $500,000, $100,000 is going to do it. And it's not just a competitive issue, Mike. I mean, this is a different story for a different day. I think the NBA has an issue with just basic customer relations. I'll say it that way. It's just looking out for the customer and saying, yeah, we're thinking about you. We know that you paid a lot of money for this, and we're going to give you the best possible product. A couple of years ago, and this still blows my mind, the Golden State Warriors, Steph Curry, one of the most popular players in the league. They had Steph Curry at the time. They had Draymond Green is still on the team. He was on the team then, obviously. It's like some star players, and they went to New Orleans, and they sat Steph Curry, they sat Draymond, and somebody else, like a really good player. And Steve Kerr was asked after the game, all right, so what do you say to fans? And he said, well, I would hope fans would look at our schedule and see that, we played, back-to-back or we had a tough schedule and so it's time for, load management. And I'm thinking, I'm supposed to look at the schedule? I'm supposed to know all this stuff when I'm just buying a ticket. If I buy a ticket a month before the game and I know Steph Curry is going to be in town, now you're expecting me to do all this research just because I just want to go to a game. So I think it's a problem when you introduce load management, when you introduce all these things that have become a part of the NBA landscape, and then you're surprised when you run into some trouble or you have your fan base looking at you skeptically as if, hey, is everything on the level? I'm not sure or not. And I think that's a fair question based on the way the NBA has done business the last several years.
And if load management is legitimate and not just cover for tanking, tells me the season's too long. There shouldn't be a load to manage if the season wasn't too demanding and too taxing on the players. But here we are, 82 games for the NBA, 82 for hockey, 162 for baseball, only 17 in the NFL. And the NFL does from time to time have isolated tanking issues, and the temptation to tank is always there. And the NFL has maintained a firewall between the football season, during which, in theory, everyone is trying to win every single game no matter what, and, oh, look at this, I was going to say L.A. Las Vegas, man, that's going way back. Las Vegas Raiders have the first overall pick in the draft. All right, they're one of the top stories of the offseason because they got the first pick in the draft. Don't talk about how they got it. And, of course, one of the reasons they have a problem with Max Crosby right now is because they decided to not let him play the last 2 games of the season, even though he wanted to. Same thing with Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers played through most of the season with injury. Get to the end of the season, Bowers and Crosby, you're not going to play. We're going to protect you. Why? Well, it's pointless. Well, no, it's not. If you lose, you're going to have the first overall pick in the draft. So there are other examples of it too. The situation, and I know it's been 12 years now, but it's the most glaring example of tanking that I can remember. And people think the fact that Jameis Winston didn't become the long-term franchise quarterback for the Buccaneers makes it okay. But the Buccaneers went into the final weekend of the season needing to lose to the Saints to secure the ability to draft Jameis Winston. That's the guy they wanted. All they had to do was lose. They were up 21-10 at the half. And Sean Payton's told the story. He was coaching the Saints at the time. He was on PFT Live 3-4 years ago. And he said, you know, there's a guy who talks into my headset with all the lineup changes, and he'll say 25's in for 21. So I'll know that there's been a personnel change. And when they came out for the second half with the Bucs up 11, it was like being in a bingo game. It was nonstop. This guy's in for this guy. This guy's in for this guy. This guy's in for this guy. They took out all their starters, and the Saints won the game. And it's the most obvious example of tanking that's out there, but it's real. The temptation is real. Who cares if you're 3-14 or 2-15? Who cares? But that one extra loss, if that gets you the guy that transforms your franchise, then that's far more valuable. And no, and people they want to, and I don't know why there's a pro-tanking lobby out there that's constantly coming up with these arguments like you're on a cable news show. Well, no player is ever going to go out and try to lose. No, that's why they have that guy not play. That's why we don't want to have to tell him what's going on. We're just telling him you're not playing tonight like the NBA's doing.
Yeah, and Mike, you say no player is going to do it. I wonder what it does for your franchise long term. So let's say you're successful in your tanking mission and you get Andrew Luck, or you get in the NBA Victor Wembanyama, or you get one of these kids now in college basketball. What does it say for the other players who are around looking at this nonsense? Because they're not all going to go. Some of those players you expect to be a part of a future championship team. And that the organization, if your organization says it's okay to do this, are you really building a winning organization even though you come away with the prize of the draft? I can't think of a lot of examples where it has turned into championships. I'm sure there's one. I mean, the Rockets eventually did win a championship with Olajuwon. Ralph Sampson wasn't there when they won it, but it was they won it 10 years after the tanking. But in football, obviously the Buccaneers didn't win with Jameis Winston, and they needed Tom Brady for that. The Colts never won a championship with Andrew Luck. And so, yeah, it works to get the prize, but does it work for the ultimate goal, which is winning a championship?
And I happened to find the article based upon Sean Payton's appearance on PFT Live, early February 2022. So it was during the LA Super Bowl week. And he said the idea of tanking games to get the best player in our league is mythical because you can't turn off and on winning. The idea that it benefits you as a club is crazy. Your locker room soul, you sell. Now, that's the mindset of somebody who doesn't want losing to ever be introduced into his building. There's no acceptable losing, even if there's a benefit from losing, but there are organizations run ultimately by dysfunctional owners who think it makes sense. Hell, the Browns had a system 10 years ago, courtesy of Paul DePodesta, the former chief strategy officer, where they paid bonuses to executives and coaches based upon cap space that was carried over from year to year, based upon stockpiling of draft picks. It was a roundabout way to create an incentive to do things that will make it harder for you to win now. So it was high-level tanking under the guise of we're building for the future. Well, part of that effort to build for the future is to get the best possible draft picks, and they ended up with the number one pick 2 years in a row. So it's real. And how it ties back to the NBA situation is very simple, because the NBA needs to do this, and one of these days the NFL may have to do it as well. You just have to create a draft process that completely removes the incentive. You can't dilute it. And I think one of the reasons the NBA lottery system hasn't arrived for the NFL is the NFL doesn't even want to acknowledge that there's any connection at all. They don't want to even look that way. They don't want anyone. It's he who must not be named. That's how they deal with it. You have to completely remove any incentive, direct or indirect. It can't be lotteries. It can't be this formula. It can't be that formula. You get nothing. You get no benefit from being bad as it relates to the draft position. The problem is these leagues are all premised on the idea that we're going to give the worst teams dibs on the incoming players. And I don't know that that's good for the incoming players. I don't know that it's good for the teams. I don't know that it's good for anybody. But if it ever blows up in a full-blown scandal for the NBA or for the NFL, I guarantee you that's when they're going to come up with a draft process that is completely independent of how good or bad you are.
Yeah, I agree. But I don't know if they'll do it. I don't know what would incentivize the NFL to do something like this, because I think it would be bad it would look bad if they did it. It would be an acknowledgement, although we know it's happening. So the Raiders did it this year. I'm sorry, the Raiders did it. You can't have Max. There's no reason to send Max Crosby home. There's no reason Brock Bowers is playing and then you shut him down for the season. And it makes sense that they would do it and use a guy who they knew they were going to fire. So they tell Pete Carroll to do it. He has no choice. He doesn't know that he's going to be out, but if he doesn't do it, if he doesn't do what they tell him to do, he's certainly going to be fired. He was fired anyway. So it's easier to do when you have a lame duck coach. It's harder when you have somebody who is, second year. Like Brian Flores, perfect example. It's harder when you have a Brian Flores who says, wait a minute, if I lose games on purpose, you're eventually going to hold that against me. You're saying you're going to give me a bonus now. Yeah, that's now. What happens when things don't go as well as you expect, when the player is not as good as you think he is, and then you come back and cite my poor record for the reason for dismissal. So it's harder to pull off with coaches who are actually trying to win games.
Oh, but you got it all wrong. You got it all wrong. There was no effort by the Miami Dolphins to tank. The notion that Stephen Ross said to Brian Flores, I'll give you $100,000 for every game you lose, that was a joke. It was a joke. And it was a very funny joke. A joke that every time I think of it, I can't help but laugh at how dysfunctional the Dolphins were and continue to be. And but for the investigation that allegation prompted, the league never would have busted the Dolphins for tampering with the aforementioned Sean Payton and Tom Brady, who's now part of the structure in Las Vegas that resulted in their tanking this year. We're doing the weave, the unintentional weave. But that's where we are. And it's going to take something big that gets Congress involved, that gets people prosecuted, some type of tanking scandal. And you may be asking yourself, because I thought of this as well. You mentioned Pete Carroll getting fired. What's to stop him from coming out and saying, those assholes were tanking last year? Well, here's what's stopping him from doing it. His buyout. While guys are still getting paid by the team that fired them, they will not say anything publicly, because if you do, that faucet gets turned off immediately. That's why this whole Browns thing eventually came to light. Once Hugh Jackson, who was the fall guy for how bad the Browns were under this plan to reward coaches and front office personnel for stockpiling cap space and rolling up, stacking up picks, when the team was horrible, out goes Hugh Jackson. Once his buyout was satisfied, Hugh Jackson started to say what he needed to say. So if there's something big that happens and if it leads to a real consequence, that's the only way the NFL is going to change it. I think the NBA would be in a position to change it before the NFL, because it seems like there's more tanking. It seems like there's more of this dynamic, more load management, or whatever the case may be. And this fine, $500,000 for the Jazz, $100,000 for the Pacers, this is an effort, flimsy as it may be, by the NBA to stave off that reckoning, Michael.
Yeah, and I'm not, some people might think I'm trying to tank the show with my lip sync. I'm not trying to do it. I'm trying to win. The lip sync is getting in the way. But I hope you'll hear the message here and remind me of who it was. I want to make sure I get the person right. Was it Jimmy Johnson? I want to attribute this quote to him, where he's saying you're not really competing against, 31 other teams. At the time, I don't think there were 32 teams when he said it, but you're not competing against the entire NFL. You're really competing against, 10 to 12 teams who are functional, good ownership, good coaching, actually trying to win. And when we start talking about these examples, I can see what he means. Like, maybe the number is higher than 10 to 12, but I think we'd all be shocked if we could peek behind the curtain and figure out and find out what motivates certain franchises. And you would think what motivates them is just an all-out pursuit of winning, but that's not true.
No, it's an all-out pursuit of money. If you identify success based upon winning the Super Bowl, you're going to spend your life tormented and upset. And I've come to the conclusion over the past 2 years that Jerry Jones is full of it when he says how badly he wants to win another Super Bowl. And there are people who believe he does. Sims and I argue about this from time to time. I think that Jones knows he's playing a role. He's a carnival barker. Step right up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, and give me your money and your time as I go and try to find another Super Bowl championship. I didn't say what he once said at the press conference, a term that we've used from time to time, because every time I say it, there's somebody who isn't in on the joke, and they are aghast. Do you know what that means? Yes, I do. Jerry Jones apparently didn't. And then when they threw him a lifeline by tying it back to his time spent in the oil and gas exploration business, he said, that's news to me. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.